Good morning, everyone. My name is Juan Lara. This is my coworker, Barry Grenon.
Hi.
And today we're going to present on how we use MediaWiki as a software documentation CMS. We're going to go over how we got started and how our wiki evolved over time. So first, Barry will tell you a little bit about who we are.
All right, so our company's called Genesis. We're a software company based in San Francisco Bay Area, Daly City to be precise. It's a privately held company, so it's not publicly traded, and there's about 5,000 plus employees in the company, a little bit more. And our group, we're the technical documentation team. So we have a group of about 40 or so authors and editors, and we're responsible for writing all of the canonical technical software documentation, all the content, videos as well, stuff like that for to support our software. So we use MediaWiki actually not as a knowledge management tool across the company. It's strictly as an authoring platform for our writers. So only the writers have write access to the wiki. There's some other contributors around the company, but they're feeding into our technical content. So that's who we are.
So before we adopted MediaWiki, this is what we started with. We used FrameMaker to create PDFs of our deployment guides and install guides, and we used RoboHelp to create compiled HTML files. So these workflows had two big weaknesses. One was that our PDFs were only updated about twice a year. So if you had a typo, you had to live with it for about 6 months. And RoboHelp CHMs had to be ready a month before the software release. And there were cases where the software itself wasn't ready in time for us to document it. So we really wanted to move on to a better system, and specifically an online system. FrameMaker and RoboHelp were industry standards for a long time, but better things had been developed since we started using them. Like many of you, we didn't have much of a budget, so we looked to open source. And a few people on our team came across MediaWiki, and they launched a pilot project to see how that would work with our content. So this was the first iteration of our wiki. And this wiki was very well received, very successful, and this pilot project grew and grew until eventually it ate all of our content. One criticism people had, though, is that they felt very lost and unmoored when they came into the wiki. It was hard to go from product to product and from page to page. And all of the links on this website were custom made, so they could vary from page to page, and the structure wasn't consistent. So we're really looking for something that would help us construct our website around this concept of products and manuals. And around that time, we came across another company that had the same use case as ours. This company, Splunk, developed an extension called PonyDocs. And PonyDocs added to MediaWiki support for products, manuals, a table of contents for each manuals, versioning, and user permissions. So it gave us all the features we needed to use MediaWiki as a documentation content management system. So after we adopted PonyDocs, we re-architectured our website, and now our articles look more like this. So as you can see, when you come to our website, now the site is consistent from web page to web page. You can see exactly what product you're in. You can see related pages on the sidebar. And we have links to other guides at the bottom of the page. So the website architecture is much simpler and much more consistent. So what PonyDocs did is it adds support for these content management pages that allowed us to define the products, the manuals, and the versions for our documentation. And each of these content management pages maps to a certain part of our website. For example, here we define a product, And then that product definition, that name for that product appears on each web page related to that product. Then we define the manuals that are the manuals in the documentation set for each product. And for each manual, we define the topics, the wiki pages that are part of that manual. And here, this table of contents page also is read by our wiki and maps to this sidebar table of contents. And finally, another important piece of this for us was versioning and permissions. So for each manual, each manual and each wiki page has a separate page for each version. And versions can be released, preview, and unreleased. And depending on whether or not you're signed in, you'll be able to access different versions of that page. So this maps to this drop down on the right upper hand side of each page. And this drop down populates based upon what user access rights you have. So this all worked very well for us, and the next step in the evolution of our wiki was to move on to structured content.
Okay. Maybe just a little bit more on what Ponydocs gave us is it made, so when we left the PDF books, 300, 400, 500-page manuals, say, and made sort of granular structure online with a bunch of separate wiki pages, maybe with some manual links. Yeah, that was, unmoored was the word. So what Ponydocs did is it kind of made books, online books, out of such large content sets, which made people feel comfortable in the move to online content, because it felt more like the book structure they were used to inside. You know, it's some of the books have a narrative flow you have to follow from section to section. If it's a really complicated deployment, say there's 60, 70 pages maybe for one task that you really have to complete in one order, breaking that up into separate URLs and clicking through using links was disorienting for people. So the left-hand TOC that collects all the topics is integral. The weird thing, though, is our web analytics show that people don't actually use that left-hand TOC. If you take it away, they feel lost. But they actually use the inline links or sidebar related topic links. They're willing to read 5 links and then choose among those. They're not willing to interact with the big left-hand table of contents. But it has to be there psychologically, it seems. It's a weird thing. So we would like to maybe move away from having these big, some of our TOCs are monolithic. They're hundreds of separate topics in one big nested TOC. You're probably familiar with that from a lot of software help documentation, and it's unwieldy. So we want to move towards another model. Every page is page 1 is the model. The next presenter will talk a little bit about that. But and we didn't discover that model until we started applying some structured authoring principles to our content. That's what we'll talk about a little bit now. So on top of the Ponydocs stuff, which just basically preserves the book metaphor for content online, there's also, we discovered almost accidentally that there's so much you can do in MediaWiki if you structure your content in templates. So one of the very first and simplest projects was just an integrated glossary where every glossary term that makes sense for our content gets its own wiki page in a namespace. The front page pulls all those pages together in a list by query. Writers inside the Ponydocs content can, using a little template call, pull in the glossary term. It'll pop up on screen in a tooltip so they don't navigate away from where they are. And by using a query on the usage of that template, the individual glossary page can show where that term is used in and across the content set. So it's a nice little circle. And that would be really difficult to do, I think, using any other TechCom authoring tool that I know of. But that was a simpler project. A little more complicated. all of our products have subcomponents, and it's a very configurable software set. So there's many configuration options. They're all stored in XML file. So there's descriptions of the default values, valid values, and a short description of what the option does. And so we just have a script to push those all, similar architecture, one page per option in an internal namespace that's not customer facing. But then we can pull that into any number of visualizations in our public facing content. So we have a drill. The front page for all our options is a drill down page. You can select. Do you want to try to do it actually? So you can select, your product, drill down, and you get. This is built with page forms and cargo, and you can get your a list of all the options related to your specific subset, right? And then you can link out from that to the canonical location in the public-facing page. So there's many books, many manuals, Ponydocs manuals, that pull the same options into large pages that just list the static options. And so there's a couple of visualizations right now, but it's so easy to just invent a new visualization whenever somebody has one. Once you have your content stored in this structured way and you can query it, you can just do anything you want. So far, there hasn't been anything that we wanted to do that we haven't been able to figure out through, some effort. Do you want to click through to one of the actual pages? So on the TechCom, we would call this single sourcing, content reuse, and our industry has a lot of tools to support content reuse, but they tend to be really complicated, and that applies. All your content has to be structured in a granular way in order to take advantage of reusing things, and not as fine-grained as this either. So we just find it very flexible. We can structure the content that needs to be structured. A lot of our reference content, it has a structure already, so we structure that and we reuse that. There's other content that isn't structured. It's just a how-to page, and then just have at it, just write it out. So the mix of structured and unstructured is it's just so flexible, Here's another project. So. So we have whatever 50 so products and components within those products, and they all have their various requirements, what operating systems a given product release supports, what databases it supports, and we would document this stuff on static tables in the old days in a PDF, and being able to just capture this data once, also control the data. Whereas in the past, people would type things in a 600-700 page PDF, maybe even bigger than that. Writers would be typing this in by hand. Red Hat, Linux, AMP, and then it's all by hand. But here you can, using page forms, you can control all the data. So you have to select controlled data from a drop-down. And then you can this is a lot of our solution engineers and professional services and so on. They're the ones that have to answer questions to customers. And for them to get this kind of picture of what's supported across a range of products in the old way, that would take them quite a while. They would have to go to each of these static pages under the product list. Those are all static pages that will have the more static tables explaining what's supported. But to pull all that together for those users would maybe be an afternoon to find this data, whereas, it's pretty quick to set this up and then they can get a canned query. So we have a list of 10 other canned queries that they want to see in order to, make their lives easier. Like I said, we would have probably, if we got those requests as a group, we would have probably had a writer assigned to just create those separate tables manually by hand, and it would be a ton of work to maintain. So we're trying to cut down on that kind of low value add work in our group.
So when we adopted Cargo, we were able to see this cargo design pattern for structured content. So as Barry mentioned, we have a lot of reference content that lends itself to structure. So using Cargo, we were able to design a content structure and build a Cargo database for that content. Then using page forms, we design an input interface for the people that can populate that content. And then we can use templates and Cargo queries to build different visualizations and different ways to consume that content as needed. And so this is what that looked like for the supported operating environment reference guide we made. So we have product managers that need to input that data. And our product managers especially need a very simple interface because they're not wiki users. They're on the wiki maybe once every few months. And the data needs to be structured very strictly. And also the input values need to conform to an exact specification. So using Cargo, we on the content architecture team were able to build this data table for that content, build this input form, which uses very simple drop-downs for our product manager, and then build, as you saw in the previous slide, this visualization for engineers that need to consume this data in very complex ways. So that's how our wiki has evolved over time, and now we'd like to go over where we want to go from here.
Yeah, we could see refactoring Ponydocs to use Cargo. I think that would make it more flexible. The product and manual metaphor works well for our content, but all the products work together. So having our content kind of caught in product silos, we want to figure out ways to maybe a new top-level architecture that organizes things along a totally different axes, and we feel like moving that into Cargo would allow us to be more flexible with different kinds of queries in order to build a top-level architecture. Maybe it would be more organized around user roles if you're an agent or an administrator, that type of thing. In ideal world, right, we didn't have access to any of these query tools in the beginning because Ponydocs was like stranded on MediaWiki 1.16. So that's why we had to wait so long to start using this stuff. But ideally, we would have wanted to have, as an authoring platform, we would want to have more kind of like WordPress templates, right? So strict templates. When a writer comes to do any work, they would have to choose the kind of article they're going to create, and then in that creation process, capture a bunch of metadata, and that would drive the whole site architecture automatically, and then there would be nothing, no facing the blank page, I guess. And that would help our content quite a bit. It's, what we have so many writers and so much content, 40,000 plus pages, I think, right now. It's kind of hard to steer the ship in that direction, but that is what we would like to do, is have take the guesswork out of it for writers, especially new writers. Yeah, and then as you do that, capture, offer writers those templates, that data also becomes queryable and it's structured, so you can have any visualization that you want. And then at that page creation moment, capturing all that metadata, we would like, richer subject affinity linking. So that would be cross-product linking along various axes of information. So not the hand-coded left-hand TOC, but more like sidebar link, related topics maybe, but along various axes, and those should be all driven by metadata queries. And we'd like to start pushing that into place. And that a rich subject affinity linking is a principle, every page is page one principle that Alex is going to talk about in a few minutes.
Right, so what we're describing and what we're getting at is what we like to think of as an every page is page one content management system. And every page is page one is a set of ideas from a writer in the technical communication world named Mark Baker. And his idea is that technical writers are very comfortable with the book model of thinking about things. But in an online environment, this model breaks down because people are jumping from book to book, from manual to manual, from product to product. And again, no one reads a documentation manual like a novel from start to finish. And so his idea is that our content management systems need to support different ways to access data, different paths through the information. And not only that, but the way we write documents needs to change. So what we're hoping is that as we've moved from vanilla MediaWiki to Pony Docs that gave us manuals and this book support for information, that we'll be able to leverage cargo to get towards this every page is page one CMS that allows different paths through our information. So this is the end of our talk. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
So you talked about importing the, let's say, software product configuration options specified in XML into MediaWiki.
Yeah.
Right? Was that custom code to transform, to have an XML parser, parse this XML, and create pages on the fly? How did you do that?
Yeah, that's right. It was a script. I think it was XSL, and then MediaWiki API to write to the pages, and then structure it in a template format. Yeah.
You talked about the Pony Docs and how that was set for an old version. Who updated it? Was it you or was it Splunk? And yeah.
Well, we've customized a lot from what they released. So we're talking to them now about trying to merge back so we can, because we have features that they want, and they've developed features since they released it that we want, but we don't have a common core, so we can't share features right now. But we have to scope how much effort that is. If the features they have are really compelling, maybe we can afford the time to align on a common core. But so the business case is tricky. We have to make sure it's worth it, right?
So you've modified it for yourselves. Have you released your updates at all? Or?
No.
Shame.
Yeah. There's a bunch of stuff we did, yeah. Whatever, the meter president made us feel a little guilty. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we could talk to you after about what it actually takes to, how much do you need to support, and it's hard for the company to justify.
I would love to help you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of other stuff that we've done, it's so flexible when it's open source. So there's, we have an automated release note process. We use Jira's or Bug Tracker, and it just pushes right to the wiki. There's a few other things we've done. It's very flexible if you can, if you have the folks that can do the work to build it. So far, we've been able to do anything we wanted.
And one more thing I wanted to mention is that not many people in the technical communication world use MediaWiki. So it really is underused and underrated as a platform, especially as you get into structured content that Cargo and Semantic MediaWiki let you use.
Yeah, that's true. So 5 years ago, people were experimenting with MediaWiki a lot more in technical communication. They tried it out and they stopped using it for various reasons. But none of them used any of the query-based tools to help solve content problems. So when they're comparing, I don't know I'm not sure it's a fair comparison. They haven't dived deeply enough into what you can do if you start structuring your data and querying it. Yeah.
Have you looked at any other tools, or what are the other competing solutions out there?
Well, there's a lot of tools. Yeah. I guess the industry standard would probably be Data XML. But it seems to be breaking down a little bit. So for me, the most exciting documentation out there is developer documentation. People that don't want to use the traditional TechCom tools, too clunky, is the theory. I don't know if that's totally true. And they're moving to develop their own in-house solutions. So a lot of places, will develop their own in-house solution. A big one right now that's really getting a lot of play, I think, in API documentation, but also in regular documentation too, is the GitHub to static site generator workflow. People are really liking that, which sounds really good to me too, except that there's no database in the mix. So I don't know if you can do queries then. So some of the more complicated content management stuff that we face as enterprise software, I'm not sure, it may hit a limit, but it's really trendy right now, that GitHub static site generator workflow. Good, thank you.